Hello, hello. I wanted to make a quick video recapping some of the work we did last week on the Station ID project, where we've been taking the Station ID layers from our Photoshop file and using them as a starting point to make an animated Station ID in After Effects. So I just wanted to make sure that the few things that are really essential to know about that process have been highlighted. So let me just start by sharing the project that we were working on. Okay, there it is. I'll go home and let's see what resolution I'm at. I'm at full resolution. Let's run through this one time at half resolution because it'll play more closer to the real playback time or speed. So let's try it. This is what we were working on last week. I think we just about finished it. It's a little slow. Okay, so that was the project. And as I've said, you know, I favor this kind of very painterly and sometimes lush design mode. You don't have to work that way. I like it, but you can be as stark or as funny or as cartoony or as jazzy as you'd like, as long as we're seeing the information clearly and you're communicating those couple of things we really need to know about the station. You don't have to follow my lead in terms of using this kind of painterly mode. All right, so I'm going to stop. And let's just talk about the few things I wanted you to take away from this project. First of all, we did a lot of work when we were making this thing in Photoshop. I don't even know if everybody finished that day. It's a big lesson. But we did a lot of work and we came up with all the layers at the right size in the right stack. And it looked very pretty. It looked like this, more or less. Let's get to the end. And then we can say, yeah, that's what it looked like. So it looked like that. Nice Station ID. We can count on some of that design work being preserved when we bring it into After Effects. Specifically, what will be preserved is the layer sizes, the text size, the fit of one layer over the other, and the layer styles. For instance, I think we took some time to, let me just zoom in here a little bit. Let's see. Yeah, so let me change this to full resolution. You'll see it gets less fuzzy. Looks nice. There it is. Looks good. Take the hand tool and we can kind of squish that over. And you can see this is where we did some work getting a nice looking bevel and emboss on the outside of the text. We also put some layer modes on the text, which help the text to pick up some of the background. I'll turn off one of these here and you'll see we did it. I did it twice because when you take, here I'm going to take off one of the two 20s. They're in a stack, that 20 stacked on top of each other. When I take the top one off, that's what the bottom one looks like. That's the result of what I think we had as linear dodge on top of this one, which I think was maybe color burn. Yeah. Okay, so that's what the bottom one looks like. But then when you put the top one on top of it, it looks really nice. Same thing with these two. That's a stack of two identical pieces of text with different modes on them. So that's just the bottom layer. This is the top layer and the bottom layer. So we did that work in Photoshop, and that work will come right into After Effects. You don't have to do it over again. If you say, when you import the composition, that you want to keep the layer effects that you made. So all of this stuff came in kind of ready to start building the animation. And let's just remind ourselves how we did that, okay? So that you do it correctly and help yourself, not make yourself crazy with this. So really what it amounted to is that in putting together our project, of course, the first thing we did was we went to the composition, wanted our composition settings to be right. You can do that with Comp 1 or Comp 2. And here's Comp 1. And we wanted the composition settings to be the same size and shape as the Photoshop. So we looked for this HD HDTV preset, and we used it square pixels, 2997 drop frame, full resolution, time code, duration 11 seconds, etc. So having done that, that then is going to take the exact same size file and put it into the animation format. Okay, so that's what we did with those composition settings for Comp 1. And then I said, go import the whole Photoshop file. So I said, import file. And I had made a folder for this project, as we should have a folder for each of our projects. And in that folder, I have the Photoshop file. There it is. Okay, there's the Photoshop file. I also had some of these videos that I thought might be useful. This is the one we ended up using. It's the gray and white sky. This is a blue and white sky. I've made a bunch of these at one point out of my studio window. Here's a sunset movie, here's a water movie, etc. So we brought in, I think, the nature movie and maybe the sunset movie. And then I said, go get the HD ID PSD file and import that. So I said, open it, and it's going to say, how do you want to do this? If you're going to import this Photoshop file, which has about 20 layers in it, what do you want After Effects to do? So what we said was, tell After Effects to bring in the whole composition, retain the layer sizes, and also retain the layer styles. So it'll save us some work. That's, you know, these things are the layer styles. So I'm going to say, okay. And what happens is that when I say okay, you're going to see, I'm actually not actually going to do this again, because what it'll do is it'll override it's already in there. So I don't want to go through overriding it. So I'm just going to say cancel. But under these circumstances, this is exactly where you would say okay. And then what you would see is that you have a composition called Comp 1. This little icon here that sort of looks like, you know, a piece of film with some sprocket holes on it. Those are compositions. That's the little indicator that you've got a composition. So it says we made a Comp 1. Yes, we did. And now we just brought in this HDIDF3 composition. And in that composition are all the layers. So right underneath it is going to be a folder. And when you open that folder, there are all the layers. Now, it's great to have them all. They're not going to be in the same order that they were in Photoshop, because in Photoshop, we build really from the bottom to the top, right? So the bottom is the first layer, and the da-da-da-da-da, and we built a stack. But when we bring those into After Effects, After Effects reorders them in this project window alphabetically. So because we had some layers that had a number at the beginning, 20, those are the first. And then there's B's, and then there's C's, and then there's L's, and it's alphabetical. So we have to rebuild the stack the way we did it in Photoshop, but that's not so hard to do. So you can see that really what we ended up doing here, I'm just going to go back to fit on this, is I started with the sunset picture, which was the first thing we used in Photoshop also. Someplace here is the sunset. Look for SU. There it is. That's the sunset picture. I put that on the bottom. And then on top of it, the next thing I put on top of that was the nature movie. So look for N, nature, that's this one. And I put that on top, that's a piece of video, because it's largely black and white, and I knew I could use it then as what's called a luma matte or an alpha matte. It's a kind of a track mat that allows you to have parts of the image are transparent, some are translucent, some of them are opaque, according to what's black, what's white, what's gray. So it's a lot like the kind of masking and matting that we did before, where we said, if I make my mask out of my mat, or my mask rather, out of a gray to white gradation, where part of it is going to be completely transparent, part of it is going to be completely opaque. And that's really what we're asking for in this movie. This movie, what it does is not a great piece of footage, but it's just, and you can see it even has some faults in it. It just kind of rolls towards you. And so what it does is, where there's white, you'll see the sunset picture, and where there's black, you'll see the clouds. We're asking this to act like a mat. So enough. Anyway, so I'm going to go back to the composition. Here we go. Comp 2. Just want to move this down a little bit. Comp 1. Let's look at Comp 1. Comp 1. Come on. Oops. There it is. Okay, so we put together the first couple of layers. Here's the sunset, here's that moving cloud. Then we took the water layer and we just, here's the water. The water is, if you hit caps lock, it'll refresh the layer menu. The water is just this, probably made in Maya. And we stretched it out and we put it over the bottom of the lake portion here. So that looked good. Then we brought in Miss Liberty. Miss Liberty's next. And we had already done the work on her. She's already been sized and colored and everything's done. All we have to do really is animate her in. And then I worked on the BMC, the first and the second layer of the BMCCs together. So you can see, while they're both selected like this, if I work on them, come on, let's go. They're not quite ready yet. Come on, there they are. So I worked on them together. I animated them together. That's the same principle that we did when we animated the ball and the 26 on the first project we worked on. By keeping these two layers selected while you work, the changes you make to one will be made on the other also. So we did that. And then I started to animate on the 20, which just does an appearance. It goes from 0 to 100% opacity. And then finally, there's the little moon that comes in. Okay, so there's my moon. And I think we talked about this idea of closing with a little bit of animation that's just kind of cute or attractive. And that's what that little moon does. It's kind of the coda, or the end of the composition. So this is pretty straightforward, I think. What I want you to realize, however, is that there are some things that don't come in from Photoshop. One of them, of course, is that the order is changed, and they're going to be alphabetical when you bring them into After Effects. So it's worth it to take some time in Photoshop right before you export or import this Photoshop document to name your layers. I have gotten used to it over the years that I call it oval, I call it moon, I call it Liberty. It's very helpful. Otherwise you keep running back and forth to your Photoshop file trying to figure out which one was which. And that's one thing. And the other thing is, it doesn't necessarily bring in masks the way that they were needed, that you're going to need them in After Effects. The size and scale of the mask may not be attached to the layer. So you may have to work on the masks again. Simple things like what we did in this, we just have one mask on the second composition. you could easily do them over again in After Effects. So let's talk then about using two compositions, one nested inside the other. You've already seen this done in your hot movie from the tour. And I think I showed you a little bit about turning around one of the layers in lesson 1 with an adjustment layer. But let's just quickly go over it again. Comp 1 here is pretty much everything you see without this outside border. And you know, you can tell, I think, when you add the border back on, it's really these letter boxes. It's an improvement. It helps you to focus on the information that we're trying to get across. But let's just see what Comp 2 was to make a Comp 2. Let's look at Comp 2. Comp 2, I started out, I just filled the whole screen with a gradient. You can see there's the dark blue on this side and this side, and there's light blue in between. I just pulled a gradient across it. And then I put a few blue lines, these lines here. So here's the blue gradient, all right? And then you see these dark blue lines, like here's one and here's one. They're also graded from a light to a dark blue. Again, we're trying to get a feeling of light and sort of luminance inside this thing. So I made one of those, and then I copied it and put it on the bottom. So I have two of them. And then I had the two ovals that came in from Photoshop. I had made the ovals in Photoshop. So here's one of them, and here's the other one. And I've done this kind of thing before, so for me it was really easy. I just wanted something that was going to swoosh back and forth slowly, not grab too much attention, but make for some additional kind of richness in the animation. So that's what the ovals are for. And so they're very simply animated. They just swoosh back and forth at different rates so that they don't look like they're running on the same treadmill, so to speak. And that's it. And they repeat if they need to repeat. What you want to make sure is that your animation is as long as the Comp 1 that it's going to be sitting on top of. So in this case, I just think I've got like 11 seconds of these guys going back and forth, again, very slowly. Now, the reason I'm looking at what looks like black in the middle there is because I had put a mask on this, but you'll see it, it's in on the other composition, which empties out the middle. So I make a hole in the middle where I can see the other composition through it. So I'm just gonna stop this and go back to home, and then go back to Comp 1. And you can see, here's Comp 2 sitting on top of Comp 1. But if I crank open, and it's right on top of Liberty, I wanted to make sure that these letterboxes cover up the bottom of Liberty, so it sort of looks like it makes sense in terms of space. So if I crank open Comp 2 here, you see Comp 2 has a mask on it. And let me just show you the mask lines. Come on. Come on, Comp 2. Maybe I didn't select it. Let's select it. There it is. And this, incidentally, will show you what your masks look like, okay? They look yellow, and if you're doing a shape layer by mistake, that looks blue. But the yellow is a mask. So there's a mask, and if I were to make that mask do nothing, here's a none, then you would see that I have to watch those ovals going back and forth on top of my beautiful design. So I don't want that. Instead, I'm saying subtract, please. So I'm subtracting everything in this layer, this composition, within that rectangle, and nobody knows the difference. It just looks like it's supposed to be that way. But that gives me a chance to poke a hole so that I can see the animation that I want you to see. And if you don't want to see this, you just click that off like that. There it is. Okay. So again, using one composition, maybe to do a majority of all the animation, and another composition to frame it, is perfectly fine way of putting together this project. Some of the stuff is above the Comp 2, you know, on our stack. For instance, the BMCC on air, the 20, the Moon, the Borough of Manhattan Community College, all those layers are actually above the comp on the stack. But it doesn't matter. As long as you're doing it so that you get the result, you're fine. You're fine. So having done that, I then would just go ahead and render this. And the instructions that I gave you for rendering the tour movie are really the same as what I would give you for this. You put this in your render queue if you want to use After Effects to render it, and fill out those 3 forms, so to speak, or 3 windows you have to fill out, and render it from After Effects. If you're using a CS version of the Creative Suite where it automatically sends everything over to the media encoder, then you're going to find those same questions are going to be asked of you in the media encoder. So it really comes down to the same knowledge base and the same three windows that you have to fill out. So that's really all I wanted to do for this project today. But then our next project is going to be working with 3D layers and 3D properties in After Effects. And for that, I've asked you to do a little preparation with the pen tool if you're not used to using the pen tool, because we need to be able to be facile with that. You don't have to be an expert, but you have to know pretty much how to use the basic pen tool in order for that project to be successful. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.